nine, eight, seven, six, five, four, three, two, one. Let's go. So, thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview with me today. I hope that I'm going to learn something about the education system because there's lots of things that I don't know, and you're the person with all the experience, so I hope that we'll be able to get some answers to questions. So, well, I know who you are, but other people who are going to listen to this don't know any information about you. So I'm going to ask you just a few questions to set the scene. I will preface this by saying that you were a PE teacher that's physical education, for quite a long time. I don't know how many years it was. Do you know roughly how many years?
Oh, I think I taxed up 38, 39. I didn't have a full 40 when I retired.
So, is that average and usual, 38, 39 years to do something like that? Or is this 40 the number?
Well, 40 means you get your full pension.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So they've got that sort of the carrot there waiting for you at the end when you chalk up the 40 years. Super. And where were you doing this job? Where were you working as a physical education teacher?
Throughout all that time.
Well, just give me the basic places where you worked. So we can start with countries, because I think you did it in 3 different countries. Is that right?
I worked in the northeast of Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in England.
Mm-hmm.
And also a little bit in the borders of Scotland, and then ended up back in the northeast of Scotland.
Okay, super. And just for information for people, that's where you are now still. It's up in the northeast of Scotland. So,
Yes.
in the beautiful Shire of Murray there, right on the coast. So let's get into the path that you took into education. Why did you choose to be a teacher? What was the impulse, if you can go back and remember?
Oh, the impulse to be a teacher, I think that could have come from way back when we had a neighbour 2 doors down who was my first primary school teacher, and she was absolutely delightful. And I can't actually remember her name right now, which is very sad, but it'll come back to me. My father knew her. She also came from Bucky, where he had been, and there was a contact there, and she was just wonderful. So that was a little bit of the inspiration from the start. Other than that, because it's a PE teacher I am, throughout my life I'd always been encouraged to do things actively, and I just loved moving. And a lot of my life was based around that. So in the end, when I thought about it and eventually decided that was the path, because there were other paths I could have taken, I opted for what I thought was something that I would enjoy for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's great. I think we can also add in the information that you are retired now. And how long have you been retired for?
8.5 years.
Eight,
Well, basically 8.5 years, but remember I worked for 3, 4 years afterwards doing teacher placements.
okay. What is that? Can you explain what teacher placements are?
Well, other people who are following the path that I took, who were coming out of college and teaching, going out on teaching practice. I was their mentor or supervisor, and that's, I went in and I gave them a crit on what I saw.
Hmm. A crit is uh, constructive criticism. Would that be right?
Constructivism. Yes, good policy, good parts of their lesson, bad parts of their lesson, how it could be improved, where they were taking it after that, that type of thing.
Super. So passing on your experience to the new teachers, basically.
Yes, I loved that. I really loved doing it.
Hmm. Wow. And you mentioned that another teacher was one of your inspirations when you were growing up. So where was it that you grew up?
I grew up in Aberdeen, and
Uh-huh.
which is now the big oil city, as you are aware of. It's quite a metropolis.
But I imagine that it was quite different when you were growing up there. Is that correct?
Yes, Aberdeen is a very cosmopolitan city now, but at that time it was just the big northeast city, with fishing and, outside farming and, that type of thing.
Super. So you also said that you very much enjoyed activities, sports, moving, and that you wanted to do something you could enjoy for the rest of your life. So at some point in time, you had to make a decision. I want to go into teaching, so I have to go and study to train to be a teacher. Uh, do you remember when you made that decision?
Yes, I made it really in the end of my fourth or fifth year in secondary. I mean, there was a time when I wanted to be a vet, and I really wanted to be a vet. There wasn't much money in our family, and a vet training at that time was 6 years, and I had no background experience. But I had the qualifications, uh, you know, and I would have had to go and spend another year in secondary as well, which would have made it 7 more years that my parents would have had to support me. And it wouldn't, one of the reasons that teaching was a good thing was the fact that I could do it in Aberdeen, and I didn't have to
Mhm.
go away from home. Whereas if I had taken the path of veterinary college, I would have had to be away from home.
So one of the reasons was that you could be close to your family and it was less expensive for them.
Yeah, the main reason being finance. I mean, finance was a big reason.
Hmm. So where did you study?
Are you talking about for my teaching?
Well, yeah, I think you went to a typical secondary school in Aberdeen, would that be right? And then,
Yes, we had to pass the 11 plus then to get into the school I went, and I passed the
mhm.
11 plus, and we were streamed at that time, and I ended up in the A stream, which was really quite nice, and stayed there until subject choices at the beginning of fourth year.
So what happened to people that didn't pass something like an 11 plus at that
They
point in
went
time?
to what was called a junior secondary school. Um, for example, Helen, who you know, she didn't pass, but there was always an appeal system, and the school seemingly appealed for her because they thought she would be better in a senior secondary as opposed to a junior secondary, and she was borderline. The 11 plus had many bad things about it, as well as good, but because she was a year older than me. When they did the actual assessment for you to go to senior secondary, that was taken into what they called your, some kind of score that they did at the time, so that she lost loads of points just because she was a year older.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so it was a university, or it was a college, or a teacher training college? Where did you go when you went to
I went to
university?
Aberdeen Academy. There were 4 schools I could have gone to. Oh
Mhm.
no, actually, only 2 at that time.
Sorry, Aberdeen Academy was that's like a university. What age were
Aberdeen
you?
Academy was my secondary.
Oh, that was your secondary school. Okay. So that was when you were 12 years old. Is that
Yes,
right?
I left there at actually 16, just the
Uh-huh.
way
So
I
so where did you go when you left there at age 16?
I went to a place called Dunfermline College of Physical Education,
Uh-huh.
which was based in Aberdeen. It was the
Uh-huh.
only PE college for women in Scotland.
And did you have to pass some entrance exam to get in there, or how did it work?
Uh, uh, well, you had to do a written why you wanted. No, I don't think we had to do that. I can't remember doing that. We had an interview, a face-to-face interview with the principal and some of the deputies, and we had a physical, a practical test as well, so that they put you through certain gymnastics things, game skills, that type of thing.
Hmm. And did you have a favorite sport activity or something similar that you did at the time?
Oh, yes, I was a very good athlete.
Uh-huh.
I used to run and compete at the Scottish Schools Championships.
Uh-huh. Did you win anything?
No, I once got to a final.
Hmm.
I I think I was a lot better than I ever had the chance to be, because we trained for 2 hours a week in the summertime, and that was all.
Uh-huh.
You know, it was, looking back now, I can see that there were paths that, had there been a coach. My father was very supportive. My mother was always supportive as well, you know. Um, but the training I did was minimal.
So it was basically about your natural ability rather than specifically training at that point in
Yes,
time.
very much so.
And the study was for how many years?
3.
3 years. And this is maybe a little bit of a complicated question, but what do you think that you learned from those 3 years at the Dunfermline College that you studied at, if that's the
Well,
right name?
they taught you to teach.
They taught you to teach, right? What is that? Okay, I'm not sure that I know what that means. That they taught you to teach. What did you learn?
I learned how to teach.
So this was different methods of explaining things to students, or it was something else, or it was different because it was not classical teaching in a classroom, but it was sports activities. Did you learn special training drills connected with the sports activities, or was it something else?
Yes, you actually had something called theory of not teaching. You had the theory of the subjects that you were liable to be teaching.
Uh-huh.
You had theory of gymnastics and You had anatomy and physiology. You had, as well as your own practical ability, which they worked on improving, you were continually, in a small group situation, maybe of 15 to 20, asked to be the teacher and set up like that. And then you would sit down and discuss what it was, and you were out teaching very, very quickly in that first year as a group going out to a primary school. It was primary then, and then eventually sent out on your own, usually two people, but you had the sole responsibility for that class in that school. And someone would come and tell you exactly what they thought of what they saw. And there was no punches pulled.
It sounds quite practical.
Yes, the one thing they did was actually teach us, as I said, to teach. I learned how to teach. I remember my first class on my own, and you will laugh at this because I thought, obviously, I will watch my language. I thought, oh my God, what on earth have I let myself in for? And then I thought, I can't go home and say I don't want to do this because my mother and father would have died. And I thought, well, you better just get on with it. And as I got on with it, I suddenly realized I was enjoying it. I remember that first class.
So it's a bit like you just have to jump into the water and go with the flow, really.
That's right.
Wow.
Absolutely. But I can remember that feeling still and thinking, the other option would have been go home, say, I'm not going back there. Would have been to get a job because there would have been no second chance, I don't think. Not the way things were.
Was the college that you studied at well equipped? Did they have the things that you needed there?
Yes, they did have the things we needed there, but it was unfortunate. I don't know whether you remember Woman Hill. The Woman Hill building was partly a hospital and partly a RPE college, but most people came from outside Aberdeen and were actually boarding. So the boarding houses were all over the place, and our field space, if you like, was also down at Chanonray and Old Aberdeen, up at Keppelston, where they had the tennis courts and the I was going to say AstroTurf, but it wasn't AstroTurf in those days, it was Blaze. So that you had an all-weather pitch.
So you had to travel around a little bit to
There were
use
buses organised, for these tutorials that you went to.
And when you were at university, how was it financed? Was it your parents that paid for you to go through university?
It wasn't a university.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was a college. Yes.
College, and there was no degree at the end of it. There was a diploma. Right. It was financed because of my parents' earnings. I got a full grant. And the full grant allowed me to pay my mother and father £2 a week for board. And I had to live on that, and I worked my holidays.
So you got a grant from the government, is that right?
Yes. It was
and
it was according to the means of your parents. Your parents had to fill in.
And then you paid some of that money to your parents, is that right?
I actually paid my mother and father for board.
Was that normal at that time to do that?
It was normal in our situation, in that I had a younger brother, and my two elder brothers were by then working. So it was normal that of course they helped me out if I was stuck. And
Hmm.
occasionally I did become stuck, but not very often. I managed to manage my budget within the amount, and that was pay for fees. The summer before I started, we had a bill for, I honestly can't remember how much it was. Perhaps it was like £150 for all the equipment that I needed to go to college because we had to wear the correct items for the correct subject, for gymnastics, for hockey, for teaching, and it was it was almost like a silly finishing school the
Uh-huh.
way it was run, because I used to hate it because my peers were all at university or at primary teaching, and they had so much freedom that we didn't have because we were really worked very, very hard, you
Uh-huh.
know.
Uh-huh. So your parents were very supportive of your education and your study. Is that right?
Yes.
And what did your brothers think about what you were doing?
Oh, they were supportive as well because, well, Zanny had left school at 14,
Uh-huh.
and that was his own choice at that time, because I remember having a discussion with my father once, who said that he'd never wanted him to actually leave, but he'd made the decision when my father was at sea doing long trips, and came back to find that Zanny had left school.
Uh-huh. How long was your father at sea for when he was there?
How long was my father at sea?
Yeah, you said that he had some long trips and he went
3 weeks.
3 weeks, 3 weeks. Uh-huh. So he would be away from home for 3 weeks, then he'd come back.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Okay. So when you were studying, did you have this vision of the future that you would finish your study, you'd look for a job somewhere, you'd take a job in a school and start teaching physical education? Is that what you thought would happen?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And so did that happen? When you finished your study, what did you do
Yes.
next? You started to work.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what was your first job then?
My first job was at Keith Grammar School,
Uh-huh.
and that was because the boyfriend of the time lived in Keith, and that had an influence at the time, obviously. And I stayed with his parents,
Hmm.
and then he dumped me, and I got out of Keith as fast as I could.
Yeah, that must have been a little bit of a difficult situation. Well,
However, I can't listen. I'm doing an interview with Graham, and I'll phone you back in an hour. Bye. It's
oh,
bedtime.
that was that was very professionally done. That was nice. Yeah. Well, these things happen. We get calls in the middle of doing other things. Not to worry. So your first job was in Keith, which is, for people who don't know the geographical regions, it was not far from Aberdeen. Not that far from Aberdeen.
50 miles.
50 miles from Aberdeen. So your first job was in Keith. You then looked for another job after that
Yes.
point?
And I went to Aberdeenshire, which
Uh-huh.
is closer into Aberdeen. So I went home
Hmm.
to live.
Hmm. Okay. So in your in your first job, did you feel that you were supported by the other teachers when you began? Was there help there for you, or were you just thrown into the deep water of having to
Oh, I thought
work?
I knew it all. And I was thrown into the deep water in this school that didn't have proper facilities or anything like that. And they loved me because I was young and vibrant, and the kids all loved physical education.
Uh-huh. So it was obviously difficult, but a positive experience for you there.
Oh, yes, I loved the school. I really did.
Hmm.
You know, it's, I really did.
Hmm. So the first job was there. Then you looked for a job in Aberdeenshire, around Aberdeen, and at some point, I know that you went to New Zealand. Is that right?
Yes, I knew I wanted to go to New Zealand, and I used to always look for the opportunities that were available, and the Times Educational Supplement was on the go then.
So that was a newspaper that had job opportunities.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So after towards the end of my second year, I applied and was accepted to go the following February, but ended up getting what did they send there? A telegram saying, "Can you come for September?"
Uh-huh.
And the sad thing was, I would have gone by ship had I
Uh-huh.
waited till February, which I was really quite looking forward to.
Mhm.
And I ended up flying
And sorry, was this when you were studying or when you were working?
when I was working.
When you were working. Okay.
Yeah,
So let me get this
I had
chronologically correct. Yeah, you
yes,
worked in.
the end of my second year in teaching.
So you were actually teaching in Aberdeenshire at that point, or you were teaching?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. So you moved from Keith to Aberdeenshire. You found another job in a school there. It was.
Yes, it was more than one job. It was three jobs. It was
Uh-huh.
Contour, Kemney and Canella.
Uh-huh.
And the Canella was primary only. Contour and Kemney were junior secondaries with primaries attached.
So you were juggling the work between three schools.
Yep.
Right. That must have been quite complicated.
Yes, but no car.
So you hopped on a bus to go from place to place? Yep.
Yes.
So you teach one lesson in a school, hop on a bus, go to the next school, and
Oh no, they were quite good. They
uh-huh.
organised it so that I had. I truly can't remember now. Let's say I had 2 days at the primary at Canella. No, not 2 days, 2 half days at the primary Canella. No, it must have been better than that. So it must have been a day at the primary in Canella and like 2.5 days at Contour and 1.5 days at Kemney. And the bus service was between them. My time was planned so that it would fit the bus service.
Mhm. And the main activities that you were doing with the young people then, they were sports activities, or they were gymnastic activities, or it was a variety of different things you did at
It's a
different
variety
times?
of different things. You ran a program and you were not asked to stick to anything in Aberdeenshire at all. You were not asked, to focus in and such. You liaised with the teachers. So, for example, if I was doing a dance class and there was something happening with that teacher, then you would try and plan your dance around it,
Uh-huh.
so that there was a connection. Um,
Uh-huh.
the other things I did, gymnastics, hockey, netball, not
Uh-huh.
basketball at that time. It was very much netball in that area. Um, athletics
Mhm.
was very strong. Um, and the
A-
dance.
And was this part of a national curriculum that
No,
was dictated, or
I
you could
thought
choose?
I could choose. I had total freedom to do what I wanted. Yes, teachers might approach you and say, "Do you think you might?" Or "How about trying this out?" Or
Mhm.
you know.
Um, wasn't that difficult from the perspective of there's a huge range of activities you could do, and you would have to limit it or select?
They limited it to what you had facility-wise.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
All the schools in Aberdeenshire were very well equipped. There was um, what would I call him? Like Peter Giles was an overall head of PE in Aberdeenshire, and Mr. Pollock, who was a lovely man,
Mhm.
and he went round and just saw what you were doing, and he was just delightful. That's all I
Mhm.
can remember about him. What I didn't say about when I did my PE course, which I think is quite relevant,
Mhm.
was that uh, part of our college course involved something called SRE, which was school remedial exercises. And if we wanted, when we finished our diploma uh, at college, we could take another year and a half, and we were qualified physiotherapists.
Uh-huh.
The physiotherapists at that time did 3 years.
Uh-huh. So there were other possibilities and options for you.
There was the other option. I did think about it, but I didn't really want to do physio. I loved we had to go and work in a hospital
Mhm.
for 2 of our summer holidays, not for the whole summer holidays. I think it was two weeks that we did in the physio department, and that was really interesting, And I always feel that it was a good background to have.
Mhm. So when you studied, just taking a step back so that I understand this, when you studied at the the college and you were doing the teacher training, that was a classical sort of September to June
Yes.
school year? Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Just so that I understand. Right. That's great. So we got to the point where you were in Aberdeen working at those three different schools and you were looking for an option to go to New Zealand because you'd always had this dream about going there for some reason. You maybe wanted to see the other side of the world. I don't know what the reasons were for that. And you found an opportunity and you took it, yeah?
Yep.
And you this opportunity, it was a job or it was further studies or what was it?
Job.
It was a job. So what was the job?
The job was a head of PE at Wanganui Girls' College in New
Uh-huh.
Zealand.
So how could you get from Keith to working in Keith to working in Aberdeen to suddenly being head of PE in a girls' college? That seems like quite a jump. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Um, they were very short of teachers in New Zealand at the time.
is, uh, is that a way of saying that they were going to take anybody who almost else,
Well,
or?
you did have to have an interview process to go
Hmm.
through,
Hmm.
and I think they sussed you out. They obviously asked for references,
Hmm.
from the school and also from Mr. Pollock that I
Uh-huh.
told you about, you know, and I don't remember there being any problems in that area.
So, what did your family think about this move?
They were quite happy for me to go. It was quite, they didn't want me to go, and I said, well, it's only for 2 years, or maybe, and I wanted out of Aberdeen. I was in a rut in Aberdeen, actually, you know.
Uh-huh. You
I,
felt like you needed an injection of something new to.
I needed something new. Yeah, I mean, I can remember, being in Aberdeen, and it was, I could say that I thought, God, I don't want to socially do this for the rest of my life, which involved. I remember that was but nobody would come with me. I mean, everybody said, "Oh, well, you go and we'll think about it." But in particular, at that time, there was my cousin Betty and my cousin Frances, who is Betty's younger sister, who
Mhm.
you don't know. And they were all going to, come out and do something as well. I mean, but nobody else did.
Uh-huh. Um, so did you feel like you were on your own a little bit, or was it that you really enjoyed the freedom of breaking out of Aberdeen and getting into a new
Well,
place?
yes, that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, right, I'm getting out of here, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and going to go and see a bit of the world. And New
Uh,
Zealand being where I wanted to go, I
do you know what the spark was that put New Zealand into your mind as a place to go?
no, I just always wanted to go there.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
You know how you have this, like my Moscow dream right now.
Uh-huh.
You're
Yes.
always, and I thought, right, so if there's a job there, I'll go for it.
Super. So what was it like when you arrived there in New Zealand?
New Zealand itself was like a one horse town. When I drove up into New Zealand, into Wanganui, after arriving, I looked at the main street and thought, I almost expected to see horses tied up outside the shops. It wasn't that far behind, but it was, I would have said, socially further behind than Great Britain was at the time. It was very precise. Uh, Everything seemed to be, you did this and you did that, and it was quite interesting.
Um, could you elaborate on that a little bit? You said you did.
Each child up to fifth or sixth year, I can't remember precisely, had 3 periods of physical education a week.
Uh-huh.
My head teacher, I had to teach one dance,
Uh-huh.
one gymnastic, and one games. And there was very little variation between that. So your games were netball, hockey, tennis in the summer,
Uh-huh.
and you still did your one gymnastics. Well, you could have a little bit of variation in your one dance. So that's quite a lot of dance in a year. An all girls school it was. Okay,
Mhm.
so that makes things a bit more uh, obviously in the boys' schools it wouldn't have been the same, but the head teacher had obviously a lot of say in it. I mean, I was told this is what you have to teach in your 3 periods. What I actually taught in them was
Uh-huh.
never really monitored and such.
So you described the town as something like a one-horse town, but there must have been some college facilities there, maybe a sports hall that you used, a field that you played games on. Is that
The
right?
school I was in had everything,
Uh-huh.
absolutely everything. 9 tennis courts,
Uh-huh.
fields I could plan as I liked, um, 2 big hockey pitches. The
Mhm.
tennis courts are also substituted as netball courts as well.
Mhm.
Um, the top field became an athletics track in the
Uh-huh.
athletic season, and we had a swimming pool, a 50-meter swimming pool. I remember it as that. It maybe wasn't quite as big, but it was a big pool.
And so
9 feet at one end with diving boards.
you must have been quite happy to land this job in a place
Oh,
that had all
the
these
facilities were
facilities.
wonderful. The facilities were absolutely wonderful.
Uh-huh. And so you worked there for how long?
2 years.
Sorry, 2 years or 3 years?
Two.
2 years. 2 years.
Two.
And that was because that was a contract for 2 years and you planned to go back?
I
Or?
had to. I had to because of the system. I had to stay 2 years, or I had to pay my fare back.
Uh-huh. So you must have been quite sad to leave the girls' college then at the end of.
Oh, I would have stayed much longer, but I think from the family history of this is that my father died
Uh-huh.
while I was there, so I never saw him again.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so for lots of different reasons then you came back to Britain after 2 years and you then went back to Aberdeen or where did you go when you came back?
Well, I came back with a husband, didn't I?
Yeah, well done, well done. Why not? Yeah, why not? So, uh,
I came back and we stayed in Aberdeen for a year with Granny.
uh-huh. Who was your mother? And then what did you do after a year in Aberdeen?
Your dad was working at McFisheries as a quality control manager, and he was also studying to get his meat inspector's ticket for Great Britain, which was ridiculous. I mean, he still had to study the law side, but the rest of it he'd done all his life. So
Hmm.
um, from there, I'm trying to get the right context of that because we moved around quite a lot. We went to Bromsgrove. He applied for two jobs down in that area because he was very poorly paid,
Hmm.
you know. I remember that. And he got the one in Worcester. And it just happened that Jenny, who had been with me in New Zealand, who I'd met in New Zealand, we kept in close contact with, and we went down, and while he was going for his interviews, we stayed with her mother
Uh-huh.
in Bromsgrove, and that's how we ended up staying in Bromsgrove for 3 years.
And
You know,
where's Bromsgrove exactly geographically?
south of
That's
Birmingham.
south of Birmingham. Okay, in England, right? And so you stayed there for 3 years, is that right?
Yeah,
And you worked there, or?
I worked there. Yes, I had a job in what they called a secondary modern school, but they were in the process of changing the system to comprehensive.
Uh-huh.
And I ended up as head of department in the uh, North Bromsgrove High School, and the school I'd been in originally became South Bromsgrove High School, um,
Uh-huh.
so that they went completely comprehensive while I was there.
Mhm. So how did you feel um, about the differences between working in that college in New Zealand and the new school that you were working at?
Oh well, remember I came back and worked in Aberdeen for a year.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I didn't like my job in Aberdeen. Eventually, the head of PE in Aberdeen, who was a different man from Pollock in Aberdeenshire, he realised that because I had learned quite a lot in New Zealand, and I there were certain things that I didn't keep my mouth shut about. You know, they insisted that you did primary and secondary. I wanted a secondary job. I enjoyed the primary, but I wanted to work with older people. And eventually, he gave me a split, what was like a junior secondary school in Aberdeen at the time, a
Uh-huh.
middle school and Frederick Street. But I wasn't head of department. I came from being a head of department in a big school that had everything to Aberdeen, and I really did not like my job in Aberdeen. I liked my job. I did not like the restraints I felt I was put under because there was a curriculum going in Aberdeen. They had a book, and you were guided towards that. And with the class teacher in the primary being in observing, which was good because it was good. What word am I looking for? Development for them in the PE,
Uh-huh.
so they could follow up your lessons. And
Uh-huh.
it depended on who it was. And I tried to work out my own system so that they could follow it. And they were forever coming and saying, but. And I would say, but back again. But that was
Uh-huh.
because, and as I said, I think possibly they realised it and they let me do full time secondary.
So you then moved south to England.
Yes.
You worked in a school for 3 years there, and I imagine that that was a pretty similar experience in England to being in Scotland.
No, it was
No?
lovely. I couldn't
Uh-huh.
write, you
Sorry,
know.
can you say that again? I missed that.
I could plan my own curriculum. I was
Uh-huh.
under no constraints whatsoever, except by weather and what went on locally regarding netball and hockey,
Mm-hmm.
um, that type of thing.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Tennis as well there, yeah.
Okay. Super. And so that finished after 3 years. Is that right? And then you moved somewhere else? What was the story?
Dad got a job with Baxter's and Fochabers.
Uh-huh. And were you looking to go back north to Scotland at that
I
time
didn't
or?
want to go, but it didn't bother me that much,
Uh-huh.
okay?
Uh-huh. Okay.
And I
So,
ended up at Milnes, 1.5 day secondary and with 6 primaries.
uh-huh. So that was the beginning of your contact with Milnes.
Yeah. But
And
1972.
uh-huh. Wow. And you then stayed working with Milnes for a long period of time. That was 72 until
No,
no?
72 to 74.
Uh-huh. Okay. And then something changed?
Yes, Dad applied for a job in Colne in Lancashire,
Uh-huh.
and it was a really good offer. I mean, his salary doubled
Uh-huh.
from Baxter's to going down there, and so we thought it was time maybe if we were going to have any kids to have them.
Uh-huh.
So that's why you were born in Burnley.
Yes, that was the little trip south for a while. So you went south, but you didn't stay south, did you? You went there for
No, because when he arrived at the factory, they didn't know he was coming.
uh-huh.
So whoever had employed him hadn't done work, and it turned out that there was no job there for him, and I can't remember exactly what he was employed to do. And he ended up on the road. He was checking all the meat products all over the whole of England.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't all over the whole of England, but he was basically away from Monday morning until Friday, which was not good in the situation that I'd given up teaching.
Uh-huh.
Um, Having said I gave it up, I did 6 weeks
Uh-huh.
in a Roman Catholic school in Burnley. I saw it advertised in the paper and I was bored out of my mind.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, well, it's good money. And I applied for it, but I wasn't teaching PE. I was teaching English, maths, and, pardon, something else, geography.
Uh-huh. Wow, that's a bit of a step to the side from teaching PE to teaching the other subjects.
Yes.
Did you like it? Did you enjoy it?
Yes, it was okay. It was okay. It was a Roman Catholic school, and they seem to have different rules for different things. Like when somebody managed to get a rounders, bat, and ball. This was not under my jurisdiction. Remember, I wasn't teaching PE, and were. I can't remember the ins and outs of it, but somebody drank the holy wine and played rounders with a holy cross, and it was just high spirits. This is just a bit of fun. It was at the time, and I just looked and thought, oh my goodness me, it was just high spirits.
Uh-huh.
It was an interesting experience. I learnt a lot about that. I really didn't want to be a classroom teacher.
Yeah. And so
Sugar.
I think that's the phone again. So
I'm looking for you.
let's
I'm sorry. Could you phone back later? It's just not a good time. Thank you.
well done. Well done. Deflected the call. Super. Right. So we're going to jump now to the fact you came back north then after being south for a period of time, and you came back north because you had a job at. No, you didn't. You didn't come back north because you had a job because I was born. That must be the situation.
Yes.
I was born, and because of work, you came back up north. Is that right? Or was it?
Um, Dad was transferred to Galashiels,
Uh-huh.
the same company, but Bothwells, I think they were called. And we jumped at it because I didn't like Colne. It was a damp place. I don't think I saw the sun. You could go 12 miles either direction and the sun was out. But I mean, if you remember, Lancashire was an area where the cotton mills were and they needed the damp.
Hmm.
And that made things a bit difficult.
Uh-huh. So, uh, when did your contact with the Milnes School continue then?
Well, we were in Galashiels for, oh, I'm trying to think. You know, you were born 75 in Burnley. We moved when you were 3 months,
Hmm.
and Dad was looking for a job because we hadn't sold the house. It had been on the market at a bad time, and Dad got a job in Turriff. Now, I can't remember the time span there. He would have been there. We moved about a year and a half, I think, in Galashiels. And I worked there as well, just for a day a week. They found out, somebody found out that I was a PE teacher, and uh, they persuaded me to go back because I said I wasn't going to do it. And I had a lovely neighbour who said, "Oh, Elma," she said, "you know, find out. I would love to look after Graham for you."
Uh-huh.
And she did. I mean, she did it in my house, in her house, whatever. Her kids were all at school.
Uh-huh. Okay, super. So how did the connection with Milnes start up again? Let's move it on to the next job.
Right. We're back here in Murrayshire,
Uh-huh.
or Murray, because you're not. Murray is not a shire. It's a shire of Murray, but not Murray. And oh, Dad was travelling to Turriff. I was looking after you. And when we had just moved to Galashiels, his father died in New Zealand, which was quite a shock to him.
Uh-huh.
And that had a bearing on what happened when I went back to work. I'd seen the job, I knew Jane well. Dude had just gone to school, and she said, "Elma, go for it."
And Jane was your neighbor at the time, where when
Yes,
you moved back up north.
yes.
Okay.
And I said, "Are you sure? Do you know what you're doing?" And she said, "Yeah, it'll be fine." But it wasn't fine. It didn't last. You know, I think I took up the job not at the beginning of the term, it was in the middle of September. And by 3 or 4 weeks' time, I haven't got time span completely. She just said one day, "I can't do this anymore." And I said, "Right, you're leaving me in quite a nice position here." You
Wait,
know,
sorry. Who said that you couldn't do what or shouldn't do what? What?
Jane said that she did not want to look after you anymore.
Aha, okay,
When,
right, got it.
when
Sorry.
she said, "No," immediately.
Uh-huh.
Said, "Oh, having taken on this full-time job."
Hmm.
And I said, "Okay." And Murray, Dad went and got Granny from Aberdeen
Uh-huh.
and brought her back here until I decided what I was going to do.
Hmm.
And we thought that Nana Hendrey could come over for a year. You were by that time, you had a year to go before you went to, no, you had not a year to go, you had 2 years to go. And I knew that New Zealanders came over here and wanted to child sit.
Uh-huh.
So I put an ad in the local paper not the local paper, a paper called Lady, and
Mhm.
advertised. And this young lady called Robin rang me up and she says, I'll come and do it. And I said, but you haven't seen us or you don't know us. She said, I want to get out of London. And I says, well, the bonus is, and I can't remember what I paid her, full board and lodging, and I paid her. And there was, I think it was a bonus if she stayed till June
Uh-huh.
of £100,
Uh-huh.
when she finished her contract.
Uh-huh.
And she did. And that allowed us to organise Nana Hendry over for the next year, for a whole year.
Uh-huh. So because
Quite
these
a,
people were looking after me, that meant that you could work full time.
yes, Robin was in the house with you, yes.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yes, I have some distant memories of things, all a bit vague in the back of my mind. Right. Um, so we're getting on to the main point now. We've looked at a lot of the history of the process that you went through in your education and your first experiences of teaching. And we've got up to the point now where you have contact with the Milnes School, which is up in the northeast of Scotland. Now, you were working there at the secondary school, the high school, or the primary
And
school?
primary is both.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Female primaries.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And you, at the beginning, obviously, you were not the head of department there. You were just I don't know what they would call it, the normal PE teacher or something like
Just
that.
an assistant PE teacher, yes.
Okay. And how did you find Milnes in comparison with the other schools that you'd worked at previously?
Oh, it was in the old building, and I mean, they had so little facilities, it was dreadful. But we coped and we did very well. We actually had two spaces, which was good, but at least you had a space to yourself because, you know, although a bit difficult sometimes to do some things in the main hall.
But Milnes was an old school. No, it had been there for a while. Is that right?
Oh, since the 1880s, 18, something like that.
And I think it had a good reputation at the time.
Yes,
Is that
very
right?
good reputation, and always has had.
Hmm. And so, how did your progress through that school work? You worked there for quite a few years, and you became the head of department eventually.
Yes.
So how many years was that?
Well, when did I go back? 70. You were born in 75.
Hmm.
77, I went back. And from 77, and I think I got the job in 87. So,
Hmm.
and I remember I did a degree in that time.
Uh-huh. So you improved your qualifications at that time as well.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Which was
So
very good, really, because I mean, I would have done it sooner than I did it, but Paul didn't have a degree either. He was my head of department. And he did it first, and I thought, I'll never get the chance to do it because there was no way they would let two people on secondment for what you had to do out of one school. But they ran it a second time, and I'd always been promised if they ran it a second time that I could do it. So it was excellent. It was one of the best things I ever did.
uh-huh. And that was to get a higher level qualification. Yes.
Yes, it gave me a degree and actually gave me more money at that time, the way the
Mhm.
scales were organised. It meant I could jump. I was already, I think, at the top of a teacher's scale. But
Uh-huh.
if you were a teacher with a degree, you got up another couple of notches.
Okay.
There was a financial thing there.
Super. So we've gone through the progression that you experienced. Now, PE teachers are often asked to do a lot of extracurricular activities that other teachers don't usually have to do. What was your experience with this? And what I mean by this is that I think that if you're a history teacher or a geography teacher, that most of your work is within the school timetable during the day and within classrooms. But a PE teacher is always expected to do more, running sports clubs and other things connected with that. So is this
Yeah,
true
I
for
just
you?
accepted it as part of the job.
Hmm.
But, uh, you got help from some of the other staff as well, depending on what their interests were.
Hmm.
If you think about it, an English teacher often ran a debating society type thing. Um, but the hours were long, but then I wasn't sitting down marking papers at that stage until they introduced standard grade PE.
Uh-huh. And then you had more paperwork to do because of that introduction.
Yes, and there was a lot of there had also been industrial action by a lot. No, that was something else. I'm thinking of something totally different. Yeah, and when this happened, then were even more laden, and then they introduced higher PE, and that became more laden. So you had to juggle, and I mean, I must admit I didn't do as much in the end, extracurricularly, but you were always involved with it. It was just one of the things you accepted.
Uh-huh. So this involved activities at lunchtime and after school and the weekends
Yes.
as well. And generally, other teachers wouldn't be expected to do things like that, but a PE teacher would be.
No, there was an interesting thing happened that you probably have never heard about it. They started to do study groups
Uh-huh.
for standard grades and higher after school. So that there would be a study group for history, and there was money set up to do it.
Uh-huh.
So that, the history teacher would open this, say, from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock, an hour's extra tuition for those that wanted to come.
Uh-huh.
And there was money for it. And I went spare is the best way to put it. And I said, right, if you don't pay me for my after school activities, then I'm not doing any more.
Quite right too.
And they
And
did. But they then discovered how many hours we actually put in, which was not the couple of hours a week that the history teacher was doing or somebody else was doing. And by then, standard grade was in.
mhm.
And so the amount of money allocated to the school used to get divided according to, the amount of hours you put in.
Uh-huh.
It was quite interesting.
So you got something from that, though.
I
You
got some financial reward for it, but I only did it because if I hadn't done it, then they would have just let it, they'd have just given all the money to the other teachers who were doing a study class. We also did study classes for standard grade
Mhm.
and for higher.
Mhm. So did you find that over the period of time of working in Milnes that the situation for the teacher in terms of support and resources, would you find would you say that it got better over time?
Yes, there was a lot of development took place
Uh-huh.
from the beginning of let me think. I went back 77, 80s to the all through the 80s and the 90s, and even there was still development going on, but then there seemed to be a lot of cutbacks. There
Uh-huh.
had to be development to develop standard grade, there had to be development for higher, and you got time to develop within your own department, you got time to get together with colleagues and develop, and it was good.
Uh-huh. So I think also what happened during that time was that the school moved from an old premises to a new premises as
Oh,
well.
yes, that's true.
And that must have caused some chaos for the teachers and the organization and planning, moving from one space to another.
Well, you know as well as I do that it did. A split side school always has problems.
Uh-huh. Would you like to share some of your experiences of that, if you can remember specifically any examples of problems related to that period of time? I, I can um, I can add
Well,
here that I remember being a student in the school and having to walk from one site to the other site in order to have classes, which was quite interesting. I think a few of the students would get lost on the way, and
yes.
it would seem to take
Yes, and a
much
lot of
longer.
damage got done sometimes in people's gardens with a football or, these sort of things happened. It was
Uh-huh.
not. Uh, it was good to be back into one complete site. It was good.
Uh-huh. And well, that brings up a point about safety. When you're teaching physical education, safety must be a an important consideration or
Oh, it's
issue.
a priority always.
So, did you see any changes related to that over the period of time that you were working, where there were, for example, maybe more regulations that made things complex for you, or
Oh, right. Obviously, you had to have an equipment inspection, and things, you know, whereas you might have once used a rope that was frayed,
uh-huh.
and let a child go up it, then you wouldn't let the child go up it. Um, we got better equipment for the likes of gymnastics, crash mats.
Uh-huh.
You know, so that came in, and that was good. And you just had to be aware, really. Um, Around the school, I mean, they used to check electrical equipment, and I brought in something. Maybe it was a tape recorder or something that I wanted to use for some reason, but the technicians hadn't discovered they hadn't checked it, and so it had to have a safety check before I could use it. I mean, some of the things were totally ridiculous. Um, um, hmm.
So you talked about the change in the mats. That would be from the thin rubber mats to the bigger, softer plastic foam
Yes.
filled mats. What about other technology that changed? Because there's been a lot of things that have let's say progressed over the last 20 to 30 years in terms of technology. Did that affect teaching in your profession in any way?
Yes, very much so. I mean, the
Hmm.
first thing that came in for us was a video camera,
Hmm.
which you can imagine had a great deal of um, implications, and it was wonderful. I To be able to video and let a child see what they were doing was a really, really interesting experience. And of course, the fact that standard grade had come in at the same time, and part of standard grade was being able to evaluate a performance.
Hmm.
It's obviously much easier to evaluate a performance if you can repeat it with
Hmm.
a video camera.
Uh-huh. So I think that what I'll do at the moment is maybe talk about some of my experiences with the school, and I'll give you a little bit of a break, so you can take a break, and yeah, you can have a little bit of a break because we've been talking for about an hour, which is quite a long time, and I will continue with some of my experiences about the school.
Do you
And
want to come back?
yes, 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 yes. Go and take a little break and come back, and I will we will continue and have a part two, I think. In fact, I think I'll leave my experiences to another time. And I think that we'll say that this is part one. And well, I've got so many questions here that I haven't even got to. And we're really just scratching the surface of the information that I wanted to get to. But good things take time, I guess. We've painted quite a complete picture of the background of the educational experience. And now we will hopefully get into a comparison of present and past issues in education, how things have changed, and we'll do that as a part two. So that's the end of part one. I'm not going to bore you with my experiences of the school, because that would just be tedious. And it's not about me, it's about the teachers and getting information from them that we can share with other people. So we'll pause this here, and 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is the second part of our little interview, which has turned into a big interview. We finished off the first part of the interview by talking about technology and how that integrated into the work that you were doing. But you wanted to add something there. You wanted to say something that we didn't talk about in the first part. You wanted to...
Yes. In secondary schools, there were no religious education teachers, and or moral education, or RME, religious and moral education, they turned out to be eventually. And when I first did secondary teaching, all teachers had to take one period of religious education a week.
Uh-huh.
And you didn't have, you could do what you like with it. And you also landed with social education classes, where social education covers a very, very wide spectrum. And I remember when I went, I went from, I don't think I ever had to do it in Aberdeenshire, but I definitely did it in my first school in Keith Grammar. And I remember having social education classes when I went to New Zealand. I had a group that I had to take for one period a week, and depending on the age group, I can't remember if you were given guidance or not. You had a pretty wide spectrum anyhow. You could find something that interested them and interested you and talk about it. That sort of thing.
So you were basically taking some form of religious education class?
Yes, and social education.
Uh-huh. So were you teaching about God, or what did you do?
You could find a topic for discussion and open it up depending on the type of class you had and what you did, but when they brought in a guidance system into the schools, and there were people who were interested in the whole education of one child. Eventually it became that one person, the like of Lorna Reid, who became a guidance teacher, and she had her own subject and was also responsible for a group of people who she looked into. Now, you knew the very good ones and the very bad ones, and you tried to get to know the ones in between. Were they choosing the right subjects for their future education? Did they need help? Were there problems at home that they could help with? That type of thing came into schools in my being. You know, there was always somebody who,
That's okay. You can answer it and.
I think your father has answered that, because I
Oh,
told him that the last call was for him.
good man. Good man. Right. So this guidance system, or a guidance level, a group of teachers were introduced to help students to focus on their future. Would that be a good
Yes,
way to
yes.
describe it?
And to give them some background support if they weren't getting it from parents at home as well.
Uh-huh. Did this help the teachers in the school to have this introduced?
I think it was a very good system from the point of view that, you know, there could be, a pupil who wasn't achieving academically what they were capable of because there was no way they were going to because of the situation that they came from home for.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know, allowing children to reach their potential to a certain extent and to give them help if the school could help them, with social services involved in schools as well.
Did How are social services involved in schools? Can you elaborate on that? Because I find this hard to imagine how this works in my head.
Well, let's imagine that a kid gets caught stealing in Woolworths,
Okay.
right, and they will go to the school for a background report. They will liaise with the school. They will try and help in that situation. Um, Before that, I can remember just as it was coming in, I had a child who I knew was pregnant in my class, and that type of thing. She was only 13 at the time she became pregnant.
Uh-huh.
Um, that's another side of the problems. Abused children. I remember once seeing a child in a PE changing room who'd obviously, I would have said, been beaten. And
Uh-huh.
I did what I could about it.
So these were extra support networks put into place to help the teachers in the
Yes.
schools. And this brings up the topic of perhaps problems or even problem students. How did you deal with problems, and what kind of problems did you have as a teacher?
Right.
That's that's probably a really, really big question, which is very, very difficult to give to give a short answer to. But I think it's quite important because other people in other jobs really don't have to deal with this kind of issue. I think it's something that's very special for teachers in the situation where they're working, that there will be problem students, students who make trouble, who act up, and the teacher has the very difficult job of trying to control the situation. So, what was it like for you to have those experiences?
Well, you had to deal with the problem yourself originally. You know, if it got really bad, then you went to a hierarchy. By bringing in the guidance system, you could pass it on and make it aware and find out if this problem was only happening in your class or if it was
Uh-huh.
happening all over the school. That was a good thing,
Uh-huh.
that type of thing. One disruptive pupil in a class can be quite bad, uh, in that child gets, 75% of attention in a class
Uh-huh.
because how they are, and there's only certain things you can do within a classroom situation. Um, I can think of one child who I would say reduced all the grades in my class after standard grades started by, I would say, 1 grade.
Uh-huh.
And it
And
happened to be that he wasn't the only one in the class that was a problem, but he exacerbated the problem, and he got a little bit of help from 1 or 2 others, to make it seem to be that it was not a good thing to, if you like, toe the line, that it was better not to toe the line. So I, I remember that class completely. There were 29 pupils in it, and there were 2 teachers on with it. And that was good. And this one pupil, I can honestly say, reduced the grades in the whole of that class by 1 because of the situation. That was a very extreme case, and probably the only extreme case I ever came across.
And is there a system of some kind of punishment for students who do things bad? Or how does it work?
Well, it used to work that you would sit them out in PE situation. It used to be that sometimes they got sent outside the door, and the senior management team, if they were doing their job, would be aware in corridors or aware of this happening and would pick up that child. Then that became a no-no.
Yes.
You could not, which you can understand why it became a no-no.
Well, I have my ideas, but I don't know if my ideas are correct. So maybe you'd like to explain why that would be a no-no.
Well, the system became eventually, I mean, this was over a period possibly of 2 or 3 years, where teachers had to give that child a warning, and they would write it up on a board, and they could give that child a second warning, and a third warning, then you would phone for the senior management team, and that child would be taken out of the class. And there was a special room where some of these children would be kept for a period of time, and they would have to write a report on their behaviour within the class, and the class teacher would have to write a report, and then they were looked at and discussed. And that worked quite well, but it depended very much on how good your senior management team were at dealing with such things. And I think at the time that we had in our school, Lindsay Matheson, Paul Devine, Alan Frost, it worked very, very well, because they were very, very supportive in that type of situation. And the kids knew. When who took over? When his name's gone. My last head teacher, Gordon McPherson, came. The discipline, I would say, went a bit in the school because of a different sort of hierarchy that appeared in the senior management team. He was a very paper-based person instead of being up front without the pieces of paper, but he liked to have all these pieces of paper,
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes pieces of paper are not always the best way of dealing with things. If things can be unofficial, sort of, if you can get my meaning there, instead of it all having to go through pieces of paper, that it can be dealt with without that, but yet a record in a way is kept of it. Can you see where I'm coming from with that?
Well, the picture that I get is that that very often problems that affect student behavior are not actually coming from the students themselves. They're actually coming from a lack of organization and understanding within the structure of the school, say in the upper management. A lack of confidence, perhaps, that teachers have in the upper management might give students perhaps more freedom than they should have. Would that be a reasonable description?
Yes, yes, but each case is very much an individual one, as you can imagine. Each problem with that sort of thing is an individual one,
Hmm.
and sometimes maybe one one person's ideas, you mightn't like them, but they might work, and you know, you began to have to cover your back.
Tell me more.
Let me try and think of a situation where you covered your back. Um, oh, it was hard.
Do you mean that there might be some negative outcome for the teacher if the teacher didn't follow the specific rules laid down by the school about how everything should be organized?
It could be, but again, it depends on who the individual that's in
Hmm.
the senior position.
Okay,
If
can we
they're
can we take a step back a second? Because interesting for me is this idea that at one point in time you would send, I don't mean you personally, a teacher would send a student out of a classroom to stand in a corridor if the student did something wrong. In fact, I can even remember.
probably not one thing wrong, but became disruptive.
Yeah. I remember once or twice being asked to stand outside a classroom door, actually, personally. Uh, and this became unacceptable at some point. Is that
Yes.
right? And why did that become unacceptable? What was wrong with that?
Well, you had to be totally. You know what made a big difference? The Dunblane situation. Do you remember Dunblane? When a gunman went in and shot all these primary school children,
Hmm.
and that put more security into school systems, and that there had to be a system within the school. And now, if that child was outside the classroom, they could go AWOL. So, if you didn't take a register of the next class and that child had gone AWOL, you know, um, which was something that for a long time, I mean, I never took a register every time I had a class coming in,
Uh-huh.
but that became I had to,
So that
you
was
know,
like a roll call at the beginning of
of
each
each class.
class.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And then a check on the absentee list to see if that child was actually absent or if that child had registered for school
Hmm.
and should have been in your class and wasn't, which really is a very, I mean, necessary. I mean, you are in loco parentis when you're got these children in school, so you are basically responsible for them.
Hmm. Um, did you have any special methods for dealing with students who were disruptive or badly behaved?
Well, you have to remember the strap was in existence when I started teaching, and I seldom used it. I can think of probably less. I can actually only think of one occasion when I used it, but I did use it more than that. And with a disruptive pupil, and I hated it. I thought it was absolutely dreadful. But because the children expected it, if you didn't use it, then they would. Can you see where I'm coming from? It was, after a certain point, they got the belt, and that was it, over and done with.
Uh-huh. Do you think some children were, well, I can't imagine that children were looking for that, but I guess if they expected it, it was generally accepted as being normal in that situation. And I imagine
Well,
that
until they polished it, and I was ever so glad when they abolished it.
When did they abolish it? Do you know roughly?
I can't remember. You would have to dig into the archives. I can't remember. Certainly, it was still in use when we were in the old building in Milnes.
Hmm.
I don't know if it was ever in use after we moved up to the new building.
Hmm. So we discussed some problem students and how they were dealt with, but there was no special method that you
No,
used.
you would try and interest that person. If you knew you had a child and you could see that they weren't working, not doing anything, then you would try and find out why and how it could be made more interesting for them, if that was possible. Um, by you know,
Hmm.
trying to think of a situation, gymnastics, for instance. You know, um, I very seldom with gymnastics, with the senior type boys, let's say third and fourth year. Third year was always more disruptive than fourth year. Um, they didn't have their exams at the end of the year. And take a gymnastic. I knew that they didn't like floor work, but you had to do so much floor work before you could go on to apparatus. And I'm thinking about that. So that they were able to do the things that they wanted to do, but safely.
Uh-huh.
And you could use that. That was one way of, motivating them to want to work at something that they didn't want to work at. You got girls who didn't want to do PE, who wouldn't bring their kit. You got boys who did that as well. You could provide a kit for them.
But I imagine they wouldn't wear it, or did they have
Well,
to?
it depended. It depended. Uh, and you got the parents who would write letters to excuse them from PE.
Uh-huh.
And you find that this letter was written by the parent on the child's insistence. And there wasn't a lot you could do about that. If the parent said, um, that Johnny twisted his ankle last night when he was playing football and will be unable to do PE, and there's a bandage on it. And yet you'd seen Johnny out at break playing football with his bandaged ankle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are, so you have a parental thing there as well.
Mm-hmm.
At one point it became very fashionable for everybody to have really upmarket clothes. So that's where a uniform could be suggestive of trying to keep all kids the same. So that you didn't have the rich parents providing their kids with the £50 t-shirt and £50 tracksuit and the upmarket trainers and that sort of thing. I mean, that had a bearing. Not a lot of bearing, because you knew how to go about it. One of the ways I went about it was I never bought upmarket stuff
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
myself. And I would say, well, my trainers, which had been perfectly all right, perfectly suitable, cost me £7, £8, and there was a class thing there a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And there always will be in schools where there is no uniform or anything like that. And kids will always adapt to uniform anyhow. There'll always be the kid that can be innovative.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you started to touch on technology at the end of the first part.
Yes. Yes. Computers as well coming in. Well, the more you used the video camera, the more you had to use the playback, and then you could use the playback to get back into get it onto a computer. You could have a computer class where you could set your homework on. They could pick up. They couldn't say, "Well, I didn't know what I had to do," because it's on the website for your subject in the school. You began to produce more things which were much more attractive by using the technology, whereas you would make a big poster and you would spend time writing it, right? You could get this, better class materials out of the technology for using.
So did you feel that the advances in technology were benefiting the teacher? Yeah.
Oh yes, I would have loved to have been able to have gone into the more advanced technology. Yeah, there was just so much out there. It was a minefield, just how much do you use, and is that child not here to get some actual physical exercise, not spend their time evaluating their performance? And yet there was good and bad. And technology, now I just thank goodness I was in teaching when it was happening, because I had to learn, and reports were no longer handwritten, just things like that they could be done on the computer, so that you had to learn the technology of it. And eventually, I can't remember when this came about, it must have been in Gordon McPherson's time, all reports must be done on the computer. Mm-hmm. So you had no option but to become computer literate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And talking about reports, how did it work with testing in that form of physical education? The students had to have some special tests, or because obviously it's very difficult to give sort of an ABCD written test or something like that. How did tests work in physical education?
Well, are we talking about what we call core PE, where the children are not doing exams? Or are we talking about standard grade and higher PE?
So standard grade and higher, I think, from my knowledge, was more of understanding the mechanics of physical education, and there were some tests on different elements there. But as I understand it, core PE was more about physically doing the activities.
Yes, very much so. And I believe now, from having talked to colleagues, that even in core PE, there is like a profiling type of system, mm-hmm. where a child will have to use a piece of paper, I would say, because they wouldn't have all these computers in the classroom. And, these are my targets for this class. Take 5 minutes at the end of the class. Will you say if you have achieved that target and why, or not? That type of thing. Now, I'm talking about a practical situation where the child is doing a self-evaluation with the teacher saying, well, maybe you didn't actually achieve that. There's that. A practical performance is a practical performance in itself. And it was graded in the exam situation. You had examples of what was equivalent of a 1, which was high, or what was equivalent of a 4, 5, 6, which was going down to foundation level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what? Here's a little sidetracking question, but what did you do with pupils who were just not gifted in the sporting or physical education sphere? Because you must have got pupils who were like that, because everyone had to do.
We tried to run a program that there was some interest there for them. You know, a lot of people don't like team sports,
Mm-hmm.
right? Team
Uh-huh.
sports are part of the curriculum and had to be done to a certain extent in first, second, and third year. So you tried, I'm trying to think of somebody that, that was not, you would talk to them, you would jolly them along, you would say, well, how do you think this should be, or how would you do this if you were me in this situation? And, you know, how can you contribute to this lesson? Perhaps you would like to umpire this game. Do you have enough knowledge, and get them involved in some way or another, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Would that help? There were always kids who weren't gifted, but you could always, you know, try and improve them in a certain situation or ask them, you know, how would you go about this?
Uh-huh.
It was a question of being able, as a teacher, you knew that this child would never ever, want to be part of a football team or anything. But in a small team situation, in a 1v1, a 2v2, or get a more able pupil to help you in that situation with somebody who wasn't motivated, and the kid that was left when you picked teams, which was something that I probably started out doing, but never, would say, right, you're the one that's picking the team, and you're the one that's going to decide where these people are going, and just try and getting them involved. You couldn't get everybody involved all the time, but you tried.
Mm-hmm. Uh, did you ever feel that? Well, let me rephrase this in a different way. What was the average class size?
Uh, well, we were it could be up to 30. It used to be 33. It came down, but Milnes were very good. They try your 20, your core classes, first and second year, 25. And I managed to get the standard grade to 20s. And as I said, the standard grade class I was telling you about that reduced their grades, I got 2 teachers on because there were 29.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah, that's a difficult element. I think I often see certain ideas or memes posted about teaching, which is if a if a doctor had the same problem that a teacher had, where 29 people walked into the doctor's office and said, "Can you help me with something?" That the doctor would find the situation ridiculous. Yet a teacher is expected to cope with that on an everyday basis. I mean, is it possible to work through that? It must be very difficult for the teacher.
Yes, and I think it's possibly, it depends. It depends how well you can put your case. It depends on what the students are like. It, there's so many variables, but I have to admit that the Milnes was quite good class size wise. But that's why the private schools do so well.
Hmm.
Small classes
Uh-huh.
and individual tuition. I mean, there's a limit to what you can do, with big numbers.
Hmm. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to looking at how we can get around or progress through these situations and problems. What would you like to see changed within the system to try to improve it to make it better? Then where could you see
Well,
improvement?
things are happening now. Too much change. Let's, you know, look, they say, well, they're picking the good out of this and they're making changes, but in my time, there was too much change. And yet a lot of it came for the better. But, if the system isn't broke, don't fix it. But we talked about technology. I mean, you had to bring technology into it as it progressed throughout. The whole thing had to be done uh, because the world was moving on. So you have to keep pace with the world as well as everything else. So you have that going. And I what would I like to see change? Well, smaller class sizes. I mean, I know we haven't just touched on that, but smaller class sizes make an enormous difference. Um, it's good. It's good in some situations also to stream. Don't expect your teacher to take, and we'll go for just say 25 pupils in there who have a range of ability to being able to sail through, the exam that they're expected to sit at the end of it. And then the one who's down at foundation, who's had, who just doesn't have it. I mean, they don't have the mental capacity for it. So if you stream, it's so much easier to take a group of motivated, people who are highly intelligent and then, get them into bands. And that way, too, you can bring the bottom ones up and they can move through the system.
In my mind, I have a picture of something like a football league where you have like a first division and a second division, and there's a possibility for the second division to move up into the first division. Would that be something similar to what you're talking about?
Yes, and children develop at different stages. Even in my subject of PE, I remember this lassie, and she was determined she wanted to play in the hockey team.
Mm-hmm.
And she played in the hockey team in her first year. She always got a game, second year, third year, and we used to shake our heads. And suddenly, she became one of our star players in fourth year. And we couldn't believe it. She suddenly clicked. She wanted to play, and she did play. She was useless. She was uncoordinated, and and then suddenly, I can remember. I can't remember. I've got an L in my head. That's all and I remember it must have been a match, or it wasn't a class situation. And I said to Esther, "Did you see so and so? Do you know that she was as good as anybody else on the field today?" And she went right through her school, and she really, it was good. The development of children is so vast, and even you, I regret that I put you to school at 4.5. It'd have been better to go to school at 5.5.
Because?
Because you would have been more able in that situation. You were one of the ones, very youngest,
Mm-hmm.
and it's only in retrospect when I think about it, and I thought these kids that are older are at that stage, at 10, 11 months, at the stage of a 4, 5, 6-year-old, it's a big development phase.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, not that you shouldn't have gone to school at 4.5 because you were ready for it, but then there were some people in that class who were 5.5. And I think that would have meant you'd have sat your exams later. And I wonder what difference it would have made. It mightn't have made any difference. Who knows?
Well, I don't feel that it would make any difference. I think you adapt to the environment that you're put into. Is my personal perspective on it, and that if you are behind, you play catch up and you try to catch up with everybody. And I think that that's what you do. You don't recognize at that stage, oh my God, these kids are a year older than me. They're so much better. You just try to level the playing field in your own way, I think. And very often, when children are put in groups with other children who are older, I think that they naturally tend to raise their game, so to speak.
Yes, that can
And
happen as well.
better that than the opposite, you know.
Mhm.
Much better that than the opposite. Um, so, are there any other changes that you would like to see in the education system? You've mentioned class size should be much smaller. Are there any things that you feel that have been brought in which maybe shouldn't have been brought in? They should just be thrown out, and everything would be much better without it. Is there anything like that?
Oh, throughout. A lot of the paperwork is
Hmm.
that all teachers have to do. It's quite burdensome. Um, that you have to see, for example, you have to project what is going to happen this year within your department and where you are going to take it and how you are going to improve on standards of the previous year. Now, each intake of a year is different, and if you have a very capable year coming in one year, and the next year it can be very average, and you're projecting, well, how can you make that better? And sometimes if they would just let teachers get on with the job of teaching, which was a lot of the fun of it when I was first teaching, was there was nobody looking over your shoulder saying, you know, what's the profile of that child and why has that child not achieved that target? Um, and it can happen sometimes. You can shelve the paperwork and just in PE go for the pure fun and joy of movement and with no bits of paper. But it has become, I thought it was getting bogged down when I finished and talking to Esther, she says, Elma, she said, you have no idea. She said, you have paperwork for every class, with every child after every class saying they have reached such and such a target, or not reached it, or why they haven't reached it. And it's all time when physical activity is not being done. They're sitting down thinking about the physical activity instead of actually just doing it. So from that point of view, I would say it's not it's not good. The other thing is that a lot of the extracurricular, as I called it now, is done by so-called sports development officers who are
Hmm.
coming into school, and and it's done outside school hours, so only the kids that are motivated to go, you can try and channel kids still into their groups, but they seem, I think, it takes a very good sports development situation around the schools to see that this has actually been valuable. And I'm not so sure. Again, it depends on the individual, you know. So it's a hard one, that.
Hmm.
Right, let me look. Um, I think if you can keep the curriculum wide, you know, and not narrow it down too much, it's very, very good.
Can you improve forever? Well, what I mean by that is that teachers always seem to be expected to produce better results. And you pointed out that each year you get a new intake of students and you don't know in advance the abilities of these students. You might get a good year, you might get a bad year. Can you really improve forever in terms of make teaching better and better every year and better this year than it was 5 years ago and better in 5 years than it is now? Can it go on and on improving, do you think?
Can it go on and on improving? Well, this teacher's results thing, it's a bit like, like doing a poll, and depending on what the statistics are, you can always make something fit the statistics, right? The system that is in now is that they look at what they think that child should be able to achieve according to certain things on a table, that they expect that child to get a standard grade 3 at that subject because such and such and such and such, and I think they changed the goalposts. I don't think, I think in some ways education is better and in some ways it's not. I still think that children from disadvantaged backgrounds, are not given the same opportunities as those who are not, and yet some of them do make good.
Mm-hmm. How, if they're moving the goalposts, how do we know if education is actually getting better?
We don't.
That sounds like I don't mean that to be a trick question. It's just the way that it sort of came out there. It's just, it's.
The policy is that you get as many kids through these exams as you can, and that they can go on. Can it always get better? I mean, there's too many people going to university. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, and there's too few plumbers, electricians, and carpenters around, so therefore, I mean, seriously, they need to go back to, in my opinion, and this is only in my opinion, they need to have trades available for people who are not academically inclined to do paperwork and that type of thing, so that there are more skills based, so that the whole world can, can find a niche for themselves. You'll not fit everybody into a niche ever, and there'll be always people who don't want to work and who challenge the system and such like. But I think that they're keeping children longer on at school because there are no longer suitable work opportunities for them in many cases, and they're trying very hard to. If you think that the likes of my brothers Annie left school at 14,
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of people did not go into higher education. The like of my brother Bill, who was very, very bright and should have gone to university and didn't, because really my parents didn't know how good he was. I mean, he got a scholarship for Robert Gordon's College, right? And he was in the A stream all the way along, got all these hires in fifth year and then got a job, because my parents didn't realise that to go to university, it was better to have a 6th year at school and then go on. I mean, he was a bright, bright person, was Bill.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, then, what is a good education? What does that mean from the person?
Um, I
It
think
sounds like a loaded question. I swear, it's not a
was having
loaded
a
question.
little break again.
Ah, okay. You want to have a little break. So, yeah, we'll have another little break, and we'll come back and do a final segment. Which I've just got like 5-10 minutes more, so we'll have a little break. That's it, and we'll say it's the end of part 2, and we'll have a final little segment, little part 3 on at the end, probably. See how it goes. Counting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we can look at the last question which I asked, which was, what is a good education? That's it.
Right. Okay. That made me think a bit. Um, a good education is one that allows you to make a contribution to the world, to your own area, to let you live a life in which you're happy and you feel fulfilled. Um, a good education is one that allows you to make the most of what there is in this world, to the best of your ability. Um, a good education is one that allows you to develop uh, your own unique talents and take them where you want them to go. Um, a good education allows you to be critical of what is going on around you. A good education allows you to make judgments, regardless of your ability, of the situations that you see and are faced with throughout life.
Wow, that was quite comprehensive and a nice collection of ideas, I think.
You, of course, along with that, it's very difficult for that to happen without the ability to be able to read and write.
Uh-huh. hmm Do you see a big difference between private education and public education?
Yes.
How does this manifest the difference between the two? Because obviously, speaking specifically about Britain, there is a general system of education for the public, but there's also a private system in place as well for people who have a little bit more money. They can send their children to uh, schools which are different. Obviously, they feel that they're probably better. And the question is there a big difference between the two? And what is the difference, if there is?
Oh, what a big question. If I could afford it, and I was a young person with a couple of kids, I would pay for their education. So I would go private. Scotland is much better than England. I think Scotland is, especially up here where we are, there's a much better public education than there is in some other places. Unfortunately, if people do have money, they tend to be motivated, they tend to be more intelligent, and a lot of the cream of kids go into private education, and they have not the understanding of what it might be like to go to a comprehensive school in the middle of Aberdeen. So therefore, these people often go ahead, and because they tend to be in the upper echelons of the intelligence, they go on to get the top jobs without the understanding of more than 50% of the population who have to happily do the garbage collecting, work on a walker's line packing shortbread, and I don't decry any of them at all for doing that, don't get me wrong, but it's very, very hard. You know, communism where everybody was equal, as you know and I know, it would never work. It didn't work. It didn't work in Russia because you had the top dogs who had all the money and the bits and pieces and all the clout, and then you had the workers who all got their house and the little bits here and there, and so it's an unequal world, you know. I'm sure that the wee boy in Africa would be very happy to be in Britain and be able to earn a wage.
I guess that with your experience, you must have seen a lot of changes, not just within the education system, but also within society as a whole. When you look around yourself, I can think of perhaps the examples I hear from what I would call the older generation, the retired generation, who, when they talk about things like Christmas in the past, that they felt very lucky if they got a few pieces of fruit at Christmas, or got one toy that they wanted or would like to have had, or maybe it was people were not in a situation where they could afford to buy things. Maybe this toy was often made by one of the parents, or something like that. So in terms of society in general, do you think that there's been an improvement over, say, the last 40 to 50 years in people's standards of living?
I think, yes, I think there's, I mean, the state does look after those who can't look after themselves. Once upon a time that wasn't the case. The national health system coming in was wonderful. And I mean, I heard my mother and father speaking about it. You know, before that it was just, you know, it cost a fortune to see a doctor and have anything done and that type of thing. You know, basically the state is very good to those that are not able to look after themselves in most cases, but I don't think they can afford now with people living so longer, and you know, that I think the family's broken down a lot. You know, that I think the family is, you know, in many cases people are spread out throughout the world. It's not the same, but then technology has brought that much closer. I mean, would I be able to keep in touch with New Zealand? I mean, there was a big gap there when your father was barely in touch with any of his people. I mean, that type of thing. So technology in that case it's a wonderful thing. that I can talk to you in Slovakia,
Hmm.
even. So you have a.
You can even see me in Slovakia.
Yes, exactly. It's a. There's not, and yet there's throughout the world, and there always has been drug problems and war and war and more war and you know, and religion's at the bottom of most of it and has been forever.
Hmm.
It's, you know,
Yeah, that question was a little bit of a tangent, but it was still related to the fact that over time things have improved in many areas, and so it's not just about education. I don't think we can talk about education without also looking at society in general as well. They are something like mirrors of each other. We've looked at your opinions about where you think education is and where you think it might go. Are there are there any big changes that you think will happen in the future? I'm saying 20, 30, 40 years into the future. Can you project a vision of education in the future that will be different from the education we have today?
oh yes, technology is going to come into that very much so. There's going to be much more technology everywhere,
Hmm.
but the you'll never do away with the individual teacher in a classroom. If they do, then I don't know if that can be. Can we all sit with a computer and be part of a class and not be in a school?
Well, these
Can
are
we? Would it work?
these are questions for the next generation to answer and experience, probably. Although interesting questions to ask. In terms of your experience in education, what would you consider as some of the highlights or maybe personal achievements that you've had in that
There are
time?
two questions there. Which one do you want me to go for first?
Oh, as you wish.
Highlights. Finishing college with a piece of paper, getting all my hires and lowers as they were then when I was at school. Highlights. Um,
What about
One of
us?
the highlights, and you'll laugh at this one, was when Carol and her second name eludes me now, got a first class honours at oh hello Misty.
We've got the cat as well now.
Um, yes, I see you. You're beautiful. Uh, got a first class honours from Edinburgh. Uh, Having watched her go through school, that was a nice highlight when she told me she'd got a first. Um, Thinking about it, I enjoyed getting my degree. I always felt that PE teachers perhaps, were looked down upon by those people who had been to university and had a degree. You know, I could wave my degree thing in front of them
That's
after that. It was a highlight for me. I always wanted to have a degree and I got it.
mhm.
And it was a good one. Um,
There's actually a question there that I didn't get to, which I wanted to get to, which is where do you see teachers within society? In terms of respect from other elements of society? Do you think that they're well respected within society, or do you think they're seen as perhaps uh, being on a lower class or level? I don't know if I don't even know if that's a relevant question, but that was something that crossed my mind.
Where, well, until you've actually taught, you don't realize what it involves. It's a very, uh, you know, hard thing to do, and they say, oh, well, you're finished at 3:30 and that sort of thing. A lot of people don't understand how much work teachers do, but then there's a lot of other people who work just as hard and long hours. People seem to have to work longer hours, in my opinion, the higher up they are. But do they? I think, there is still a lot of people who think teachers, it's an easy life. They have their 7 weeks in the summer and their week half term, their 2 weeks Christmas, their 2 weeks Easter. Whereas I'm trying to think of the likes of Helen, who worked very hard and did a wonderful job in what she did. I know that. And she'd always go the extra mile. Teachers tend to go the extra mile, where other people will say, no, I'm finished now, and that's it. There are a lot of people who won't go the extra mile. But even in teaching, there are some who will turn around and say no.
I think that's a nice little quote to have from you there, that teachers tend to go the extra mile. I think it's a nice little idea. So I just have one or two final little questions. The first is, do schools reward teachers who are successful in any way?
Well, what is success in teaching?
That's another good question. Let's say if you are a teacher who produces a let's take it from the basic point of exams. We can also argue that exams are not a measure of success, but let's just imagine that more students passing more exams at better levels. If there is a teacher in a school who's perhaps doing better than average, do they get rewarded in any way for that?
Not really. The system, there is a system out just now to allow teachers to stay in the classroom and get a higher rate of pay if they do a certain it's like a certain course that shows that they are contributing to staff development, contributing to various sort of other things. They're going the extra mile, but they still have to have the piece of paper. But basically, they're not rewarded except, by going up the management system. The best teacher is not often the best senior management person.
So, if you had the magic fairy wand and you could wave it and you could change any one single thing about the education system, what would you change? This is my my fantasy question here at the end.
If I could change something.
If you could change just one thing about the system, and changing that one thing you feel would make things better for teachers, what would you change?
It has to be class size, without thinking more about it.
Uh-huh. So simply just having a better ratio of teachers to students would be better.
Yes.
Yes. So, thank you very much for giving me time this morning to discuss all the things that we've not discussed before that perhaps we should have. You've given me a very nice background to experiences.
Cats have fallen off the chair.
Cats. That's all right. That's what animals do. So,
Cushion slipped. He ended
no,
up in the floor. Sorry.
not to
Yeah.
worry. Cats always land on their feet. Right. So, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the background information. Thank you for telling me about how things you feel have changed and progressed for teachers, and also talked a little bit about how you see the future. And what I hope to do is edit together most of this because there were a few interruptions and breaks through it. I'm probably going to have to edit together a few different parts of it and try and create one complete interview. It's much longer than I planned it to be, but things always end up like that way anyway.
Can I add something?
Oh, of course, of course, of course.
The thing that I would add is when I think back, the thing that made most difference to my teaching, well, there were two things. One was Flanders into action analysis, which I think you may have come across in your teaching history.
I'm gonna plead ignorance on that. I've heard the name before, but only in passing. So can you fill the space in my
Remembering
knowledge?
that this was, I'm digging into the depths here, but there's two things that I believed in that all teachers need to know. The form of how you ask a question in class and put it in such a way as it's allowing a pupil to evaluate the knowledge they have and come back with it so that they are working at a higher level in that class in the way that things are put, so that things that have improved, like, for example, rote learning was very much a thing when I was at school. It's far more important that you have the understanding of that, and yet rote learning had a place, like the learning of the alphabet, the learning of numbers, and the mechanical processes. But Flanders interaction analysis, a good teacher, when they're in a class, can put questions in such a way as to allow the child to develop their knowledge at a higher echelon. And Bloom's taxonomy is about, has changed. I really can't talk about it either. It made a big impression on me, and it was, these were the two things that I like to run my department on, that depending on whether you were in the cognitive, psychomotor, and the third one was, I can't remember what the third one was. the level that you were working at. You could be down here and up here. In Bloom's taxonomy, the higher you could get up. Like Mostyn's teaching styles, for instance. You can say this is how you do a forward roll, right? Or you can say experiment with rolling. How can you do a forward roll? Is it possible to do this? Is it possible to do that? That you put it in an open-ended sort of situation where, although you're working as in PE and the psychomotor, you're also working at a high level in the cognitive.
Mm-hmm. So as I understand this, what you're talking about is trying not to lead the students to a definitive conclusion that's absolute, where the question contains the answer, but to give the students more freedom in their own mind to experiment with what the answer could be.
Yes.
It would be something like that.
But now, because of technology coming in, Bloom's taxonomy is totally different. And I didn't expect, I did go and once look at it and thought, this has had to change because of technology. Mm-hmm. And I can't, I maybe will get round to looking at it sometime.
Well, these are definitely note points to go back and study. I think, especially relevant for all teachers, and for me as well. These are things that I should go and have a look at again and refresh my memory, because I seem to go through a lot of information, and it's good to review it now and then. Any final points you'd like to add before we finish?
No, except I want to talk to you.
Okay. So I will just finish the official part by saying thanks again, and I hope that I'll be able to edit all of this together in a way in which it sounds coherent, and we can make a little record of the information. And it's been a really good experience for me doing this interview, because I can see what I need to do in the future to make things better. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.